I'm physically very far away from Pavilion, but I'm never, nowadays I'm just a Zoom call away. So that's the way it goes. I'm going to start off, as I sometimes do when I speak, with a third step prayer. So, my Creator, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Your will always. Amen. So I have to start off by saying my name is Michael, and I'm a grateful recovering drug addict and alcoholic. And yes, we met, Leslie, on, I arrived at Pavilion on March 20th, 2014. I had no idea when I arrived, Pavilion being my fourth treatment center, I had no idea that I would be there for 10 months. When I left about 7 years ago, I believe I was the third longest reigning Pavillionaire of all time. I think I may have come down the list a couple of, there may be more people that have been there longer than myself by now, but I was there for a long time, and I had no intention of being there for a long time. My attitude when I got there was, I'll be here for 6 weeks, and then I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing, because it was working so well. And I loved my drug of choice. I mean, my drug of choice was very pleasurable. It as one professor in drug and alcohol studies said to me in the desert in California, said to me a long time ago, if it wasn't pleasurable, we wouldn't have a problem with it, right? And I've never really understood people. I believe them when they say this, but I've never really understood people who say that, because it's just not part of my story, that their drug of choice stopped working for them. My drug of choice always worked for me, every single time. It never, let me down, but it always caught up with me in the end. And in the end, it took away far more from my life than it added to it. So sometimes it was a slow, my last relapse was 14 years long. So I mean, I could manipulate this thing for a while, however that long that while was, but it always caught up with me in the end. And when I got to Pavilion, I was very, very, very sick, more so on the inside than on the outside, which is saying a lot, because I looked pretty terrible on the outside. I was way underweight, and my skin was gray, and I was completely deluded. So I thought I looked like all that in a bag of chips, but I still have my ID with my intake picture on it. And I often say that in my ID picture, on my ID, I look like the creature from the Black Lagoon, minus the scales and the it was just awful. But I was completely deluded into thinking that everything was just fine. And so that's the way it goes. I come by this disease naturally. 3 out of my 4 grandparents were alcoholics. So it is in my family gene pool. There is no denying it, and there's no getting around it. And for a bunch of other reasons, demographically, I was probably just destined to become a drug addict and alcoholic. And the consequences of my drinking and using did not really take off as early as they do for some people. It really happened in my mid-30s. I was able to keep it at bay, or I hadn't crossed that magic line from being just a party person to being someone who was whose life and existence was controlled by substances. And but I did cross that line, and I guess it's true. Once they say you've crossed over that line, you can never, a pickle can never go back to being just a cucumber. And that was certainly the case for me. I don't have a sad story in terms of my family, my immediate family. My family, I come from a loving family. I come from a family where I had certainly every material need provided for. And like a lot of addicts, I don't have a bad brain. As a matter of fact, I have a pretty good brain in terms of intellect, but I don't have a good brain in terms of being able to be right sized. And so I was in many ways a perfect petri dish for this thing to take root and to germinate and to grow. And I also, when I got there in March of 2014, I really didn't think that, because I'd been to treatment a few other times before, and because I'd had a long period, or relatively long period of sobriety at one time in my life, at a prior time in my life, I guess I was afraid. I never would have admitted this, but I was afraid that maybe I was constitutionally incapable, and that the program would not work for me. Because I can be very, very good at manipulating the people around me, and I can be very good at manipulating even this disease, as powerful as it is. I can be good at manipulating the disease for a while, but then it always catches up in the end. I also have to say that I identify as an alcoholic, and I do not drink alcohol, but alcohol is not my drug of choice. It's never been my drug of choice. I don't like the way I feel when I've had too much to drink. I am a drug person, and the more illegal and the dirtier the drug, the more I like it. And I also don't like to go slowly. I like to go fast as humanly possible. So you can probably guess what my drug and or drugs of choice were. And I have to say, one of the great gifts I got from Pavillon and the staff there, from the time I arrived at Pavillon, I had people both in terms of my fellow patients and clients at Pavillon, and in terms of the counselors that my higher power put in my path. I really feel like I was given the perfect people. I was there with some really, really great guys and some great women as well, even though we weren't really supposed to speak with the women. That didn't stop me from interacting with them whenever I could. But I was there with some really extraordinary people, and about a half hour, 45 minutes before I got on this evening, I was thinking about how some of those people are no longer with us. They're not here anymore. And I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular that were much beloved by staff and a lot, and and this thing got them. And I am just a couple of bad choices away from setting the stage for this thing to get me too. We hear over and over again that this thing is, that this thing is that we have is lethal, and that it's it's after us and it's going to get us, and I think we sometimes still think, using that good sense of denial that I think helps a lot of us get out of bed in the morning. We think, it won't happen to me. And I'm sure that the people that are no longer with us didn't think it would happen to them either, and it did. And because I have been so present for my recovery in the last 7 years, and because even though I don't live in the Carolinas anymore, I have remained close to Pavillon. I have experienced a lot of loss in this program, and that's going to happen. And I know people who have been sober a lot longer than me, and loss is just part of the deal. It's just part of the deal. as a friend of mine used to say years ago, outside of the context of recovery, nobody gets out of here alive, and that's true. We're all going to have to exit stage right, and we're going to have to watch other people do that as well. And but I've learned that when things don't go my way, including the loss of people that I love, both who have this disease and don't have this disease, that is not a valid excuse anymore for me to take all of my marbles and go home and go back to living the way I lived. So as I say, when I arrived at Pavillon, I had no idea I was going to be there for 10 months. And I thought, I'm just going to stay here for 6 weeks. And, you know, it's part of that whole thing about, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans, you know. And so after I'd been there for, 6 weeks, well, actually my insurance company wanted to have me leave, primary after 4 weeks. And one of the first sober decisions I ever made, even though I didn't know I was making it, was I said, I don't think I've learned everything I need in primary. I think I want my full 6 weeks in primary. So I stayed in primary for 6 weeks. I went to EC for 12 weeks. The normal stay in EC is 6 weeks, and I doubled that. And then at the time when I was at Pavillon, it was set up a little bit differently than it is now. The young men's EC house was, when I was there, was an on-site sober living. And so I lived most of my times, about 6 months of my time at Pavillon, I lived on the property in what was then called the cottage, and it was an on-site sober living with some really great guys who became, and some of them really still are, really good friends of mine that I stay in touch with. So yeah, life had a way of reaching in and intervening even when I was in the Pavillon cocoon. I think one of the things that really stopped me in my tracks and made me realign my entire attitude about recovery and about trying to attain recovery was 11 days after I got to Pavillon, my last parent unexpectedly dropped dead. And that is when my mom died a long time ago, which is still amazing to me. As a matter of fact, she died on this day, the second Sunday of Easter, in 1996. And my dad died 11 days after I got to Pavillon. And that's when I realized, okay, you are $52 years old. You are no longer a kid, and you might want to figure out a way to get with the program. And because I had such wise counselors at Pavillon, one of them is the woman I had in primary no longer works there. She's retired, but the person I worked with most of the time I was there, a lot of you may know John Jernigan in EC, but Cheryl too, my primary counselor, because I'm a speed freak. One of the main things they had me do was just to not rush into anything, including the steps, oddly enough. Paradoxically enough, I didn't. They said, you need to slow down, and you need to just, kind of enter the flow of this place. You need to get a regular sleep schedule. You need to get a regular meal schedule, because I had forgotten to both eat and sleep for quite a number of years. I'd been on the hamster wheel for quite a long time with a very, very big job in Houston, both my professional job and my job of maintaining my addiction. And it was, I needed to just slow down and calm down and breathe. And pause, I guess, and that's what Pavillon allowed me to do. I made a couple of contracts with myself once I started there. One after my dad died was I did not, dramatically fly across the country and go to my dad's funeral. Or I didn't go to my dad's bedside when I knew he was sick. I did go in June, a couple months later. I did go and participated in his funeral in Phoenix, Arizona. But I was more prepared to do it then. Right after he died, I came to the conclusion that I was going to stay at Pavillon and do these various phases of my recovery when the professionals said I should go on to the next phase, not when I thought I should go to the next phase, right? So one of the most important things I did was to take myself, and more importantly than that, my ego out of the driver's seat, right? And I decided to put myself in the hands of people who knew better than me, which was pretty much anyone who wasn't me. It was best that I not be in charge of making any serious decisions about my immediate future. And so I let people who are trained and qualified. How about this for an idea? I let people who are trained and qualified and who know they can see people like me coming from a mile away. They can see people like me coming from 10 miles away. They know the bullshit I'm going to start trying to spew before I try to start spewing. And they just had my number. I mean, my counselor in primary and John, though they were very, very different people and approached their work from very different angles, they just could see me coming. They could see me coming before I could see me coming. And I said, I'm going to trust them, and I'm going to let them make these important decisions for my life, at least in the next, however many months. And one of the few good decisions I made, which I'm really grateful about, was about 2 weeks before I entered Pavillon in 2014, Pavillon had become a non-smoking facility. It had not always been a non-smoking facility. And I also loved to smoke cigarettes and went through quite a number of cigarettes in a day. Part of that was probably, due to the speed, but I also, even if I hadn't been taking speed, I would have been a heavy smoker. I was. That's what killed my mom in '96. So I mean, I also decided I was actually going to stop everything from the day I arrived, and I did, because I figured it's never going to get any easier, and I'm never going to have a better support system to put that habit down. In many ways, the most difficult habit I've ever had to break, and I did. And so even when I moved up to extended care with people, and they would go off the property, and a lot of the guys would smoke, or they'd vape, or they'd do whatever, I decided that I was going to do something different. As a matter of fact, my whole experience with Pavillon was about trying to do something different, because what I had been doing had clearly not worked, and it kept landing me, sometimes sooner, sometimes not sooner, kept landing me back in places like Pavillon, and kept taking me out of what I consider to be my real life and my real purpose. So I decided, there's one simple way to make sure that you never come back to a place like Pavillon. As much as I love being at Pavillon, one simple way to make sure that you never come back to Pavillon or any other treatment center is, if you don't pick up a drink or a drug, or in my case, a cigarette, which always will lead to a drink or a drug, if you don't do that, then you don't know what's going to happen, but you won't end up back in a place like this. And I've told this story before. I remember the first time I came down the men's staircase and looked at that hallway that was so long that it had like a vanishing point. And I even though it was different than the other 3 treatment centers I had been in previously, I was like, there was something like, oh, you have been here before. Oh, And I remember looking down that hall and I went, you are institutionalized again. You are locked up again. And I've done briefly for 36 hours once in California jails. That I don't recommend. I'm not cut out for that. And I've done institutions a bunch of times. And the only thing on the 3-part list is death, and I haven't done that yet, and I'm not ready for that. So I I made a series of decisions to try to shrink my ego. And that's what I did. And, you know, I had a lot of help. Once I made those initial decisions about, and some of them I knew I was making, and some of them I didn't know I was making. Once I made a couple of those formative, important decisions, you know, the task of getting and remaining sober was not that big a deal. I think part of that was breaking it down into 24-hour periods. I had never quite gotten that concept before, that this was something you don't have to do forever, or something you don't have to do, you know, in big chunks. You can do it in 24-hour periods, or when the day is really bad, you can do it in hour periods or minute-long periods. You can take this thing in very small segments. And then, of course, the other thing that Pavillon for me was really good at helping me learn is that I don't have to do it by myself, right? And as it was true of the other 3 treatment centers, and my time in recovery in New York City, where I had managed to put 6.5 years together back living in New York before I ever went to treatment ever, was that I rediscovered again that the coolest people I would ever know in this life were people who have the disease I have, and who don't pick up a day at a time, and who stay clean and sober. I always thought when I was using and drinking that the people I was using and drinking with were the coolest people. And isn't it awesome to be a drug addict and an alcoholic, and, you know, a cigarette fiend and all that? And oh, I'm so glad I'm not those boring, you know, people. And then I get here and find out that actually the people who are really worth my time and worth my energy and worth my investment are the people in these rooms, and who live and work in these institutions. And then once I got out of the institution, I discovered that the people in recovery out in the real community, in my case it was Asheville. I knew when I left, number one, I was not welcome. I was not welcome back where I had come from. I was not welcome to return to Houston. I did go to Houston because I had family there and I had friends there, but I was not professionally welcome to go back to Houston. So I stayed in the Asheville area. And I also knew I wanted to be close to Pavillon. This was before this goddamn pandemic. So we were able to go back. I would go back. I was invited before I left Pavillon. I was invited to come back every week. So it was part of my weekly, schedule every week to come back to Pavillon. I went back to Pavillon every Wednesday for years after I left. And it was just part of my routine. Another thing I did was I learned, because I was there for so long, I was able to learn some routines that simply made maintaining my sobriety easier and less of a big hill to climb or start to climb every morning when I got up. And so one of the most important things I did when, after 10 months in the cocoon, and leaving after you live on that property for that long, and I'm sure some of you who were there for even 6 weeks, it's a cocoon, and it feels like a very safe place because it is a safe place. 10 months, I remember being very nervous about leaving. And, because I thought, and one of my siblings had pointed out to me, they said, Michael, you know how to do treatment. You've proven over and over again that you know how to do treatment. It's life we're not sure you know how to do. And that was hard to hear, but it was correct. And so one of the things I did, kind of almost unconsciously without thinking about it, was I moved to Asheville, and I had that weekly touchstone of coming to Pavilion every Wednesday. And but when I was in Asheville, I recreated in that town, an hour away from Asheville, I recreated the patterns and habits and routines that I had learned at Pavilion. There was even near my apartment in Asheville, there was even a lake that I could walk around that was very much like walking around the lake at Pavilion. And I simply got hooked up with a recovering community in Asheville as soon as I arrived, and had actually been able, because of the way Pavilion sets things up, I was able to start making those connections before I left living on the property. So by the time I got to Asheville, as often happens for a lot of us addicts, the anticipation of our fears is actually worse than living out of those fears. And so I got to Asheville, and the transition wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I just was able to build on what I had learned in a lot of months in that facility, and was able to recreate my life in Asheville with some people in Asheville, in the recovering community there. And it's been, it really hasn't been that hard of a thing for me to do. It's funny, I'm not a huge fan of Zoom meetings. I would much prefer to interact with people in person, especially when doing something like speaking. Because of what I do for a living, I speak in front of people for a living. That's what I do, and I know how to do it. And it's something that, unlike most people, doesn't make me terribly uncomfortable. But I don't like doing it online, because one of the things I'm able to do when I speak to people in a room full of people is I'm able to read the room. And it's harder to do that electronically. Having said that, I am very grateful that thank you, Leslie. I'm very grateful that we have this technology, because I don't know what we would do without it. Yeah. I have a great deal of respect, and I know there's some people on the screen right now that started their recovery in this pandemic environment, and I just cannot even imagine that. But it is a testament, as Bill Wilson talks about in the Big Book and in other writings that he wrote. He was concerned that people wouldn't be able to keep their sobriety once they were in a wartime situation in World War II. And actually, recovering people were able to deal with their recovery quite better than even civilians were during World War II. And so some extraordinary times bring out extraordinary behaviors in people that are that have what we have. And so there was one time about 3 months into the pandemic this past summer, when I was still living in Asheville, and I really wanted to screw up my recovery. And I really struggled for about 3 weeks with wanting to go buy a vape pen and start smoking again. And I know it was being locked in my apartment with my crazy ass roommate, who, I just knew that I knew I was trying to get in my own way. And so what I did was, I kind of went back to the basics, and I would get up every morning and I would say, you know what, we're just going to, for 24 hours, we're just not going to go, we're not going to go buy those vaping supplies for one day, and we'll see how we feel tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the next day I would get up and I'd say, well, we'll see how we feel tomorrow. And it took 3 weeks and it passed. And I am so grateful that I did not pick up that habit, because in my experience, once I start picking up any of my bad habits, they're all eventually going to fall into line. Like a lot of us, I'm an all or nothing person. I don't do anything halfway. That can be a really good thing, and it can be a really, really bad thing. And so context is everything. I'm just grateful that you all are here. I'm grateful to share my recovery with you all this night, in this way, in this place, and wherever you are in your journey. I hope, and whether I know you personally or not, and some people on the screen I do know personally, and some people I just know from this screen, but wherever you are, I hope that you do yourself the favor of continuing on this journey, because I know from personal experience and from watching other people as well that this is really the only option for me. I don't know about anybody else on the screen, but it's really the only option for me. So I am grateful to my higher power. I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm grateful for all of the people that set me on this path. And with that, I will shut up.